AWS roles are a part of Identity and Access Management Service, IAM. You can use roles to delegate access to users, applications, or services that don't normally have access to your AWS resources. Hello, my name is Alex. I'm a senior software engineer specializing in AWS development. In this video, we will talk about AWS roles. We will define what AWS roles are. We will talk about key concepts of AWS roles. We will look at the benefits of AWS roles and best practices for using them. And we also have a demo. So let's take a look at what AWS roles are. AWS roles are a set of permissions that define what actions an AWS service or user can perform. AWS roles have several purposes, and one of them is enhance security by granting limited access, and also to simplify management of permissions across multiple services. There are several use cases for AWS roles. One is cross-account access, when resources in one account need to access resources in the other account. There's a temporary credentials. AWS roles can issue temporary credentials to access resources. For example, you have a users that signed into Cognito user pool and they want to access S3 store to upload their profile picture. You can use roles and user identity pool to assign those users temporary credentials so they can upload and manage their profile pictures on a specific area of S3 bucket. Finally, you have a service-to-service communication. Let's say your Lambda service needs to access S3 bucket, but unlike users, you can't really assign permission policies to a service. You need to create a role and then assign permissions to that role, and then you assign this role to the Lambda, and Lambda can access S3. Let's take a look at the key concepts of AWS roles. There's a trust policy. The trust policy defines which entities, users, services, or accounts can assume the role. There is a permission policy. Permission policy specifies what actions are allowed or denied. We have temporary security credentials, and roles provide temporary access, minimizing security risks. And we have a role assumptions where users or services assume roles to get specific permissions for a limited time. Now let's take a look at EC2 instance role assumption. You have an EC2 instance. An application on that EC2 instance needs to access an S3 bucket. It cannot really access it unless you assign a role to your EC2 instance and give permissions to that role to access S3 bucket. And now your EC2 instance and application on it can access S3 bucket. Let's take a look at the benefits of using AWS roles. You have security. Roles reduce the risk of long-term credentials being compromised. You have flexibility. You can easily switch permissions for different tasks. And we have scalability. The roles simplify permissions management as your infrastructure grows. Let's take a look at the best practices for using AWS roles. And you have the least privilege principle. You should only grant the permissions necessary to perform tasks. You have to regularly rotate roles. This will ensure temporary credentials are rotated frequently. You have to monitor role activity, and AWS CloudTrail is a great tool for that. There you can monitor which resources are being accessed and by whom. And finally, you should always use MFA for an extra layer of security. After all, your AWS users will be assigning the roles to the services, and those users need to have multi-factor authentication when logging into AWS. And now let's jump into the demo. But before we do that, if you are enjoying this video, please like and subscribe to our channel to help YouTube recommend it to more viewers. I am in AWS console. Let's go to EC2. And we have one instance running right here. If we select it, we have this IP address, and let's use it to SSH into this instance. We're going to be using the SSH command. Let's hit enter. And we are inside the instance, and you can see that this is Amazon Linux instance, so it has AWS CLI installed. Let's go ahead and try to list S3 buckets. We'll use the command AWS S3ls. And it gives us the message that it's unable to locate credentials, and we can configure credentials by running AWS configure. However, you don't want to do that because you will be saving your AWS credentials or credentials for a user inside the instance, and somebody else can actually get in this instance. If they get in, they may copy and hijack your credentials. So this is a bad pattern to follow. Instead, we're going to assign a role to this instance and add permissions to that role to access an S3 bucket. Let's go back into the AWS console and let's type in roles. And roles are part of IAM. And you can see I already have a bunch of roles here, but we're going to create a new role. And this role will be for AWS service. You can see that you can also assign role to AWS account or web identity, SAML federation, or custom trust policy. And our use case will be EC2. And you can see the most common use cases are EC2 and Lambda, but you can also assign roles to many other services. Let's go ahead and select EC2. Again, EC2 gives us different options here, but we're going to go with the first option, just plain EC2. Let's go ahead and click Next. Right here, we're going to look for the S3 access permissions, and we're going to select Amazon S3 read-only access. And if we expand it, you can see that this permission policy enables us to get, list, describe, and get and list Lambda actions. And the resource is anything. So basically it applies to any S3 bucket. Let's go ahead and click Next. Let's give it a name. We can call it EC2 demo role. And also we're presented with a trust policy for us to review, and this trust policy has action of assume role, and the only service that can assume this role is EC2 service. Let's go ahead and click create role. Now we need to go to EC2 instance and assign this role. So let's click on EC2 instances. Let's select the instance. We'll go to actions, security, and we'll click on modify IAM role. And as you can see, there is only one role available because all my other roles have different trust permissions. Let's select EC2 demo role and click update IAM role. So now we can switch back to the terminal and run the same command again. AWS S3LS. And now we can list the buckets that I have on the account. So I have these 3 buckets, and that's all the buckets that I have. And it shows us that we in fact have access now to S3. In conclusion, AWS roles enhance security and simplify permissions management. They provide temporary scope down permissions for various use cases. In this demo, we used already created EC2 instance with SSH access. To learn how to do this, please watch our video on EC2 basics.